Welcome to the first of the ReVeAL June webinar series. I'm Lucy Sadler. You may know me from urban-access-regulations.eu or various other UVAR access regulation things. The ReVeAL Horizon 2020 project works on urban access regulations, UVARs, which include low emission zones, zero emission zones, traffic limited zones, charging schemes, and spatial interventions. Spatial interventions are where road space is taken from vehicles and given to other uses, or the road layout is altered. They're not always defined as UVARs, but we define them as UVARs within ReVeAL, and they can be used either to complement UVARs or as alternatives to traditional UVARs. The ReVeAL project is supporting 6 cities developing good practice access regulations, and through this we'll provide a toolkit to help support further cities to develop good practice UVARs. Part of this toolkit is a series of guidance documents covering different aspects of UVAR development. 4 of the guidance documents cover the topics in this June webinar series, which is cross-cutting issues that affect all UVARs. These are, the webinar today is on ensuring UVAR compliance. If you've got an UVAR and it doesn't get complied with, then you haven't got an UVAR, so it's a really key issue. On the 15th of June, we have user needs and public acceptance, governance and financing the week after, and finally the last Tuesday in June, mobility concepts, supporting mobility measures. Today, Daniel Guzman Vargas from University of Ghent will explain the topic, what we mean by it, and then a double act from London, Transport for London, Morgan Dye from Transport for London, then Samantha Tharm from City of London will explain the choices that London have made. And then we go to Helmond, and Stephen Hirschkamp from Vitron will explain about intelligent speed adaptation, which can be used with or without UVARs to control speed and enforce skipper speed. In terms of webinar housekeeping, we'll record the session, and the recording and presentations, questions and answers will be available on the website afterwards. Please put your questions in the chat. Any questions we don't manage today, we will respond to by email, and again, they'll also be on the website. So your people are muted as normal for webinars, and now I'll hand over to Daniel.
Thank you, Lucy. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you everybody for being here in this webinar about ensuring compliance for UVARs. So as you say, my name is Daniel from research from Ghent University, and I think without further ado, I'm gonna start. I know everybody sees my screen and everybody can hear me, so I'm gonna go on. So as Lucy said, we're gonna talk about ensuring compliance in UVARs. And here we're gonna talk about the different aspects that are key in order to ensure the compliance of UVAR in your cities. One of such aspects will relate directly to enforcement, more precisely the UVAR enforcement options, their main characteristics, and the factors to consider when selecting among the available alternatives. The other crucial aspect in the enforcement of UVARs of great importance in ensuring UVAR compliance is informing those who will be affected and raising awareness of the selected UVAR. After all, if drivers cannot comply with a scheme they do not know about, communication is essential to compliance. We will start with the enforcement options. The task of the different enforcement options is to distinguish between compliant and non-compliant vehicles, and then process the appropriate information to enable penalties to be issued in case of non-compliant vehicles. Note that several enforcement options exist, and many of these can or should be combined to achieve effective enforcement. We will begin then by talking about the well-known cameras with automatic number plate recognition, or ANPR.
Daniel,
yes?
the sound is breaking up. We tested it really thoroughly before we started, but the sound is not brilliant. If you can make sure you look towards your microphone and maybe perhaps...
The problem is my microphone is in here. I'm gonna speak a little bit louder. Is it better?
Maybe louder is better.
Okay.
Yeah.
Perfect, I continue. I'm gonna speak a little bit later. Sorry about that. So where was I? Yeah, automatic cameras with automatic number plate recognition. So ANPR cameras use optical character recognition on images of vehicle registration plates to identify a vehicle and compare it against a vehicle database. So penalties or warning letters can be sent for non-compliant vehicles, or bills for tolls, as in the Norwegian congestion charges. Next, we have manual or visual enforcement. Here we talk about manual enforcement through visual inspection of vehicles by police or enforcement officers. Windscreen stickers or other documentation in the windscreen can help distinguish between compliant and non-compliant. Another enforcement option are the physical barriers, which can be automatic or manually operated. Such barriers work in combination with another system to ensure that only compliant vehicles have access. These other systems can be wireless communication systems, that we will talk next. It could be a pay booth, it could be ANPR cameras, an intercom, visual inspection, etc. Next, we have radio frequency identification, or RFID. This requires of a transponder or a tag containing an antenna and is used either for payment or to open physical barriers. The antenna receives and responds to radio frequencies emitted by dedicated roadside equipment. RFID is commonly used for toll collection outside of the European Union. In the European Union, the technology most commonly used for toll collection is DSRC. DSRC, which stands for Dedicated Short Range Communication. This is commonly used in Europe, as I say, for electronic toll payment. The system consists of a radio communication between roadside equipment and a dedicated onboard unit. Communication can be one-way or two-way, and so the system also presents potential applications within other intelligent transport systems and cooperative intelligent transport system applications, such as parking management or real-time traffic information transmission. Next, we have GNSS-based tolling. Here, vehicles are equipped with the GNSS onboard unit that allows for the vehicle's position, speed, and local time to be determined. The trip data is used within the pricing scheme to calculate yield. And this processing of the information can be done either on the onboard unit or in a back office where the data is sent via cell phone communication. With ISA, or Intelligent Speed Adaptation, the vehicle's speed is compared automatically and remotely within the speed limit. The system either does not allow the vehicle to go faster than the set speed, or it informs the driver that they are driving too fast. ISA consists of an in-vehicle system that uses information collected by means of image recognition, so say your road signs, or interaction with urban infrastructure or geolocation. We will hear more about this, about ISA with Stephen from Helmond. And last but not least, we will have geofencing, where regulations for an UVAR are defined digitally for the geofence area, communicated digitally, either to the driver through an in-vehicle notification or directly to the vehicle by means, for example, of switching the vehicle from gas to electric power. From this list of enforcement options, there are some technical aspects to consider. For example, GNSS or geofencing system may be susceptible to the so-called urban canyon effect. RFID, for instance, is mostly suitable for low-speed traffic, whilst DSRC can be used in high-speed conditions. And whenever you use an OBU or a transponder option, a transponder-dependent option, so here we talk about RFID, DSRC, geofencing, ISA, GNSS, an additional identification mechanism, for example, ANPR cameras, will be needed for full enforcement. Otherwise, simply not having the OBU or the transporter in the vehicle means that the vehicle cannot be identified. However, there are other factors beyond the technical aspects that should be considered when selecting an enforcement option. When doing so, it's important to consider, for example, that in some countries, the selection of enforcement technology may be constrained by the availability of local legal frameworks. Also, when a specific option is wisely used in a country or a region, its acceptance, interoperability, and harmonization increases. Familiarity usually also helps to achieve higher acceptance for a system, but analogously, some options may face resistance or aversion by the general population. Another aspect to consider is the level of compliance that can be expected. For example, a physical barrier is going to give us almost 100% compliance. ANPR also leads to good compliance levels. Compliance for manual enforcement on the other side depends on the resources invested. But even well-resourced schemes usually achieve less compliance than systems such as an ANPR. So the resources, both for setup and operation, are also important factors to consider in this trade-off. Manual schemes tend to be cheap to enforce, as I say, but expensive to operate at levels that achieve significant compliance. This is mostly due to the high personal costs. Automatic enforcement, on the other hand, let's say cameras, means a higher financial investment at the start, but the automatic system reduces personal costs during operations, which is particularly important for large schemes. So it is important to consider the maintenance, service, and all personal costs throughout the lifetime of the scheme. The type of UVAR is another factor to consider. Why? UVARs created through spatial interventions generally consist of physical barriers to prevent vehicles from entering a given area. Limited traffic zones can use NPR, physical barriers with transponders, or manual enforcement. And low emission zones generally use NPR or manual enforcement, potentially also geofencing in the future. And on the other corner, charging schemes can use, for instance, NPR with or without the option for transponders or GNSS. So it is important to consider that the selection on a type of UVAR may already constrain the available options for enforcement and vice versa.
Daniel,
yes?
Can you try turning your camera off? The sound coming and going. I apologize to the audience. We tried and tested this really thoroughly before starting, but I don't know what's happening. So if you can try your camera off, we can understand you, but it's coming and going. Okay?
Okay. Should I continue?
Please.
Hello? Okay. Where was I? Reliability. Yeah, it is important for the enforcement option used to be robust and reliable. Since an unreliable system may not be well accepted or prevent the city from reaching its goals and ambitions. For example, manual enforcement, if the police cannot be ready or available to enforce a scheme, then manual enforcement may not be the most appropriate enforcement option. Then we have, synchronization and harmonization, another factor to consider. Synchronization and harmonization, basically interoperability, the complementary enforcement systems should be considered. For example, complementary enforcement technologies such as geofencing could also be integrated with ISA technology to regulate and control the speed within the boundary area. Depending on the type of UVAR, the enforcement system will be linked to a database of vehicles for verification purposes, which is, in this case, we talk about the permit management system for a limited traffic zone, which is something I'm going to cover next. In such cases, enforcement, verification, and any system used for the issuing of exemptions and permits should, of course, be fully harmonized. Finally, data privacy. Some technologies, some enforcement options may generate more privacy and data management concerns than others. Data strategy in that case should be established to define the conditions and parameters for collection, storage, and exploitation of UVAR-related data. Now, before passing on to awareness raising, I want to go into permit systems, because it's a very crucial aspect for some of the specific UVAR cases that also may, its functioning and its design may affect compliance. For every limited traffic zone, eligible users must complete and submit a permit request. Such request is processed by a permit management system. This system receives the application, performs or facilitates the verification process necessary to validate the user's requests, and finally issues the respective permit. In the most basic configuration, these tasks are done manually. Applicants will submit a request in person at the front office, and personnel receives and processes the application. In case of a positive assessment of the application, the corresponding permit is issued. Now, depending on the type of permit, a permit request may include supporting documents whose validity should be verified. This, in combination with other factors, such as the design and impact of the limited traffic zone, means that the number of permits requested may pose a challenge to some cities. It is crucial then to simplify the application and validation processes as much as possible to ensure compliance and reduce the border for both applicants and the city. For this, some cities opt for a digital permit management system. A digital system can allow applicants to register their application using, for instance, an electronic ID card or a security code via a mobile app, apply for a specific permit category, and submit the supporting documentation digitally. Also, the payment of any fees, either for permits or one-off permits or one-off exemptions, can also be carried out within the website application. And additionally, some schemes have the possibility to buy immediate permits from parking meters. This is done, for example, in the city of Parma in Italy. A similar system can also be used for managing of exemptions. The Antwerp low emission zone is an example that offers the online purchase of day passes that can be bought up to 8 times. So this is a compilation of factors that within the enforcement may help us decide on the best option to implement in order to ensure compliance. The factors that we will think on during the design. Now, for awareness raising, as I said at the beginning, drivers cannot comply with a scheme they do not know about, and so communication is essential to comply. The European Commission UVAR study indicates that effective information and communication can mitigate criticism and lead to successful and smooth implementation of an UVAR scheme, which ensure its long-term effectiveness. Different communication channels exist, of course, and they can be used, of course, for different purposes. For example, one-way communication is used for information dissemination and awareness raising, and two-way for stakeholder engagement or for queries or for collection of complaints. Communication channels are also needed to provide road users with UVAR-related real-time information, which is of special importance in dynamic or reactive UVAR schemes. For example, those are only the enforcement pollution level exceed a given level, or those that react dynamically to the current situation of the city. Monitoring the communication campaign helps identify communication gaps with specific user groups, and so it is highly recommended. And basically, most of the methods here on the screen can be combined, and good practice is to use as many of the channels as possible, particularly for larger controversial schemes. One of such examples corresponds to the communication campaign of Jerusalem for the low emission zone. It was a citywide campaign of 4 languages across different communication channels. And finally, we cannot finish discussing awareness raising without mentioning the UVAR box project. This focuses on digitizing UVAR so that they can be more easily placed on navigation systems, fleet planners, apps, and other trip planning tools. Since it is key to vehicle operators, since in this way they can know about the UVAR before entering and thus, of course, comply. It is important, however, for cities to take action to make sure the UVAR information is in a digital form. So for this reason, the UVAR projects provides cities with support to do so. So cities, please take a look to the UVAR box website and make contact so we can ensure that your information is digitally available for the users. So I know it was a lot of information in a very short span. I believe there is more information. So for us, we have the guidance document coming in. And if you want to know more about that, please refer to the document and please stay tuned for the coming conversation with some use cases. So all the information is going to be more easily grasped. So thank you very much, and I'm sorry for the bad audio.
Many thanks for that, Daniel. And again, apologies. We double checked. We did everything we could. I don't know. Right. Thanks for that, Daniel. And now we go traveling from Belgium to London, and Morgan Dye will give us an overview of London's schemes. London has a large number of schemes, and they'll tell us what they are and what some of the decisions were in using which enforcement technology. Okay.
Yes, hello everybody. I hope everybody can hear me, and I hope everybody can see my screen.
I
do
can, so
shout.
everybody else can too.
Fantastic. Okay, so yes, my name's Morgan Dye, and I work in the Transport Strategy and Policy team here at Transport for London. And I'm involved in the ReVeAL programme alongside the City of London. TfL, a sort of a junior partner in the programme alongside the city, and we'll be delivering various work packages to support the city scheme and also see what we can learn from this project and the other cities involved to take forward with other London boroughs. So today I'm just going to take you on a very quick run through. Oh, is someone need to mute? Okay, so I'm just going to take you through a very quick overview of the schemes that are already in place in London, and as Lucy said, some of the decisions around how we chose to enforce those, and looking ahead as well to newer schemes as well. So as some people on the call may be aware, that we have a number of schemes in London already that are focused on road user charging in particular. The most well-known one of those is probably the Congestion Charge, which is also a scheme that's been in, one of the schemes that's been in the longest. That came in 2003. But we also have a London-wide low emission zone, which came in 2008. And we have, I think, pretty well-known now, ultra low emission zone as well. And those latter two are focused on sort of enforcing emission standards. Congestion Charge is more focused on, as the name suggests, reducing traffic and tackling congestion. At the moment, the Congestion Charge is just focused on central London, as is the ULEZ, but as you'll see later on, and as I mentioned further down this slide, the ULEZ ultra low emission zone will be expanding to cover a larger area. In addition to those charging, more well-known charging schemes, since March last year, we've also had something called the Direct Vision Standard, which I'll cover later. That's a London-wide scheme which is aimed at improving HGV safety. So that issues fines to HGVs that don't meet a minimum safety standard. As you'll see as I go through each of the projects, most of our schemes in London are, in fact, virtually all of them, are enforced using automatic number plate recognition cameras. And I'll go on to more of that as I go through. So first up, the Congestion Charge. As I said, this is the most established scheme really in London. We do have a London Lorry control scheme that I'll come on to later, which has been around for longer, but that's slightly different. Today, the Congestion Charge operates between 7 AM and 10 PM 7 days a week, and the charge to enter the zone is currently £15. Now, that was introduced last year as a way of as a sort of a COVID response measure, essentially, to make sure that we sort of didn't see a massive rise in car use in central London as restrictions relaxed. We're currently approaching a consultation on that over the summer to look at making those changes permanent. So you might hear a bit more about that over the summer, but that's the current state of play. As I mentioned, the Congestion Charge is enforced using automatic number plate recognition cameras, and those cameras are set up at the boundary of the scheme in central London. And as a vehicle drives into the zone, the camera recognises the number plate, and that can determine whether the vehicle has paid to enter the zone or not. And if you haven't paid to enter the zone, you get issued with what we call a penalty charge notice, which is essentially a fine. You are given a period of time in which to pay. It's not instantaneous if you haven't paid in advance. So I said that there's 650 of the cameras that operate around the zone, 200 poles across 175 sites, and at least before the pandemic, they captured around 650,000 images of vehicles passing into the zone each day. And those ANPR cameras link back to the central government-run driver and vehicle licensing authority database, which is basically where all of the all cars are sort of registered, and that's how it can sort of read whether someone has paid the charge or not. Some people pay in advance, some people have a recurring payment thing set up so that they're just automatically charged, but other people, particularly if you're not from London, you might wait to sort of receive a notification to sort of pay, and that's how they'll find out whether you've paid or not. There are also lots of signs up at the entry points to the zone, but also quite far out as well. If you're driving into central London or towards central London, you'll see signs warning you about the congestion charge coming up as you get closer as well. And another way of enforcing is through road markings that are sort of at the boundary of the zone and within it as well. The low emission zone is slightly different. It came in 2008. It operates across the entire city. You can see the map on the right there to show where that sort of is in operation. It operates 24 hours a day, every day of the year, and it's largely targeted at heavy goods vehicles, so big lorries, but it also applies to vans now as well. And you have to meet a particular emission standard to enter the zone, and if you don't, that's when you will be issued with a penalty charge notice again. So similar to the congestion charge, and that fine can range anywhere from £500 up to £2,000 depending on vehicle type, weight, emissions, whether you pay the fine quickly or not. As I mentioned, it covers all roads within Greater London, those around Heathrow Airport, and also some parts of the motorway network that enter London, so the M1 motorway and also the M4 motorway as they come into London. But the M25 itself, which is London's orbital ring road, that is not included, even where it actually passes through the sort of Greater London area, which it does on a couple of points. As I said before, again, the LES is enforced by ANPR cameras in the same way that the congestion charge operates, and that too links back to the DVLA database, where it can sort of look to see what type of vehicle the vehicle is and whether it sort of meets the requirements or not. You don't need to register in advance for the scheme, but some vehicles do, including some, but not all, overseas registered vehicles. This is mainly where a vehicle might be flagged on the DVLA and TfL databases as not being compliant when in actual fact it is. So if you're able to prove that the vehicle actually is compliant, then you should register beforehand. And also sort of a slightly more peculiar situation if you're a showman with a specially modified vehicle. So that is people that are operating vehicles related to sort of, I guess, sort of fairground rides and specially adapted vehicles for quite specific uses that probably aren't going to be environmentally compliant because of the type of vehicle they are. Again, at entry points to the zone, it's all marked by signs, and the cameras are in place around the perimeter of Greater London there. So ULEZ, this is again like the LES, an environmental, has an environmental focus to it. It operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, except Christmas Day, same as the congestion charge. It's been in place since 2019. If you don't meet the standard, you can still drive into the zone. You'll be charged £12.50 for most vehicles for doing so, or £100 for heavier vehicles. So you're not given a PCN for entering the zone here. You can choose to just pay, almost pay to pollute, I think is a term that they use. The cameras that are used to enforce ULEZ are the same ones that are used to enforce congestion charge. At the moment, it covers exactly the same areas as the congestion charge, and it operates in very much the same way, linking back to that DVLA database. You will be issued with a penalty charge notice if you do not pay the required fee. If you're non-compliant, you don't pay your fee within a certain time, then you'll get a notice. It's the same as the congestion charge, very similar. As I mentioned at the start, in October this year, the scheme will be expanding to cover a much larger area. You can see that on the right in the map there, which is the yellow area, and that will be really significant. It will be enforced in the same way, but it covers a much larger area. I mentioned at the beginning, we've also got this slightly newer scheme in now as well, which is the Direct Vision Standard and HGV Safety Permit scheme. That came in March last year. This scheme is targeting heavy goods vehicles that don't meet certain safety requirements. And the direct vision standard is aimed, you can see on the top right hand corner there, direct vision standard is aimed at encouraging greater visibility from the cabs of vehicles, as well as other sort of safety standards around HGVs to reduce the risk that they pose to vulnerable road users, in particular pedestrians and cyclists. So it increases the visibility around the cab, and you have to meet certain safety requirements to operate in Greater London. If you do not, then you'll be issued with a penalty charge notice. The scheme covers the same area as the low emission zone, and it uses the same cameras as well, and is enforced in the same way.
Okay, if you could speed up a little bit, Morgan, sorry.
Morgan, yeah, sure, yeah. So London Lorry Control Scheme is the oldest scheme. That's quite a different sort of scheme, though. It's enforced manually by on-street enforcement officers. So that's people on street sort of checking whether vehicles comply. It's aimed at larger vehicles, and the main point of this is to reduce the impact of noisy HGVs, basically on weekends and at night. But it's not monitored via ANPR cameras. That's the main difference there. So just looking forward briefly to zero emission zones, you'll get more of this in Samantha's presentation on the actual scheme that the city are doing about what we're doing for ZESs. It's a new sort of scheme. There aren't many of this type of scheme in place. The ones that are sort of ultra low emission vehicle schemes, really. At the moment, they're also largely enforced by ANPR cameras. But there's the differentiation here of ZESs. You could bring in, as I was mentioned in the previous presentation, some form of geofencing, which would allow you to sort of enforce zero emission capable vehicles, for example, to make sure that they're operating in zero emission mode when they enter the zone, because they might not necessarily have switched over. And we're exploring lots of different options there. I mean, we've got a lot of infrastructure already in place to cover those. So just a quick run through then of the technology choices. The congestion charge really set the standard really for what we use in London, and all other schemes have sort of built on that with the ANPR camera enforcement technology. It's something that's used very widely in the UK. We don't tend to use tag and beacon so much, which is more common in Europe perhaps. That's sort of the main reason why we've gone for that ANPR technology. I think it's just much more widely used, and it links up well with the DVLA database, and it works well for us, particularly with the volume of traffic in London. You can get further information there, or I assume the slides will be shared or something of that nature afterwards, but there's links there to all of the different schemes if you want more information on those, and also our involvement in the ReVeAL project. And I think that's it. Oh, yeah, there you go. Happy to take any questions afterwards, but appreciate we probably need to move on now to Samantha. So that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Morgan. For those that don't know, the DVLA database is the UK National Vehicle Database Registration Database, where they can look up the number plates with the data behind it. Moving on to central London, you've gone from the whole of London now, which is 1,600 square kilometres, to really the central London, which I don't know the square kilometres, but it's not quite a magnifying glass needed for the map, but onto the very famous City of London, Samantha.
Okay. I think that's showing now, and hopefully someone will tell me if it isn't.
Yes, you're showing.
We are, I'm Samantha Tharm, City of London, and this is what we're doing with urban vehicle access restrictions or regulations for under this project. And we have we've had a plan to introduce emission controls for areas of our city. So we put forward for a zero emission zone, and part of the reasons we've done that I'll show you on the next couple of slides the area we're referring to. But one of the reasons we've applied for this is the volumes of people we anticipate growing significantly in the next few years. Now, obviously, the COVID issue is one that we'll perhaps just put to one side for the moment, but even forecasts now, which are more modest given COVID, we're still talking about 300,000 to 400,000 people per day coming into a very small area, which is a square mile. So that must be something like 1.8 square kilometres, I would imagine. As Lucy said, very small area. We've got air quality problems in that we're aware of already, still breaching, even with a lot of the controls that have come in under the ULEZ programme that Morgan's just talked about. We still know we're exceeding the pollutants of concern, and we also want to address safety issues for the numbers of people who are walking on streets, safety and comfort. So as well as the zones, we've got a number of supporting measures, which I won't concentrate on today, but that's just part of the background of the project, that we also have logistics and delivery hubs program within this whole project. We're talking about controls and how we enforce our access restrictions. Morgan's already shown you where we are in the big picture, and this perhaps just put it in perspective. We're the #1 right in the middle of this map of London. So that's all the boroughs, and #1 is City of London right in the centre, and we are very small. But because we're right in the centre of London, we've got 5 bridges across the Thames, our major river, coming through our area, through our jurisdiction. So we're still significant on the transport map for London, even if we only occupy a small area. The zones that we're looking at putting controls in are the 2 shaded green on that map. So that's even taking us down to an even smaller area than our jurisdiction at the moment. But as I'll go on to say what we're planning to do for the future. We're trying to control traffic flows as well as emission standards. The whole project has we pitched in on a programme of emission controls, but we also knew we needed to bring our traffic volumes down. You can see from some of these photographs that even if all these vehicles were electric vehicles, we've still got quite a lot of congestion on some really narrow streets in our city. So we've got a number of other programs as well as the access restrictions that we're talking about today, and some of those are about how we dynamically manage loading and deliveries, and some of that's through our logistics hubs, but also people will probably be aware of systems that you can do book virtual curb space. So what we have in place already in our streets, we've got some access restrictions which are just enforced by signs. We have the supporting measures, some of which are already in place, but a few more to deliver. One of the key things I think we sort of have learnt while we've been working on this project, that it was more sensible to get the number of vehicles down initially, and then so we bring in restrictions that affect all vehicles and have periods of the day that are zero vehicles, not zero emission vehicles, but zero vehicles for the peak periods of the day. And then once we have those restrictions in place, we will go on to the next phase, which is any remaining vehicles, we would like them to be zero emission capable. And there are a few issues why we're doing that, partly because obviously the safety and security issues are important, but also it partly is a reality on what we can deliver and enforce as we go forward. Some of it's been affected by COVID, but some of it is, I think, some of the practicalities around enforcement and vehicles being ready for the job, which is a bit of a chicken and egg situation for all of us. You need the controls to ensure the market brings the vehicles forward. So we're dealing, the streets we're looking at here, those coloured purple on the map up in the top corner. We've got, this shows how it is quite busy. We've got 53 goods vehicles an hour entering the road that's called St Mary Axe, which is the main road through the middle, and so that's 53 goods vehicles, and then a total of 194 if you put in all other vehicles per hour, which that is nothing like the main thoroughfares through the city, but for narrow streets where you've got thousands of people walking in the peak period, it is a big concern. So what we use at the moment for our controls are we always have a cost benefit analysis on anything we have to do. We're a much smaller organisation than TfL that Morgan works for, so ANPR cameras do exist in some locations. In other locations, we've just got signs in, and we have mobile ANPR cameras. I'm sure people are aware of, have seen these, that they travel around in a vehicle which is licensed to us, by us, and we're able to put spot enforcement on some of these locations from time to time to back that up. One of the streets in our area, known as Beach Street, which is this tunnel, if you can, it's a bit of a dark photo, I'm sorry about that, but if you can see that, that has been an experimental one for us to have as a zero emission street. And unfortunately, we've been a bit affected by COVID and not having normal traffic flows. But even with that, the run of traffic that we've had, we put that in as a 24-hour, 7 days a week. Access to premises is permitted, but not driving through unless you're a zero emission vehicle. Some of the practical problems we've had were getting that message across clearly, and in our legislation, getting clarity of message is important if you are going to fine people and issue penalty charge notices. So that's one of the things we've worked with Morgan's team on a bit more, for clarity around what is on a sign. We've got restrictions on what we're allowed to put on signs as well. So within all those constraints, we've learned quite a bit about clarity, trying to make a clear message what's permitted, and I think, and now there's a bit of an evolution in the guidance that TfL's issuing to boroughs around this, for what the emission controls mean, and that we're actually getting closer to pure zero emission, whereas we've had a bit of a stepping stone towards it, which was still a very useful stepping stone. We do obviously sometimes we don't need cameras all the time. Sometimes a road closure is very easily signed only, and this is some of the work we've been doing during the COVID period. So it's not always that we need a very sophisticated system. Sometimes it's just a decision. And one of the decisions we're trying to make at the moment, I mean, this is zoning, this map zones in on the St Mary Axe area. The road running north-south in the middle of this, the middle street, that's St Mary Axe. The whole area is the area we've agreed to control and start putting in the zero emission restrictions. But we're making some decisions at the moment about whether we need a cordon style camera management, which is what the congestion charge has and the ULEZ has, or whether we can achieve just as much impact on air quality and just as much impact on vehicles coming in by cutting off on a few key points. And A, that's a lot cheaper for us. B, it allows access into specific buildings. We can choose where we want to put the control point. And it also just gives us a bit more, we think it will give us a bit more flexibility around how that works and still give us the traffic reduction and air quality improvements we need. So that's a decision that's in process at the moment. In the future, what we want to be able to do, I think we've all speakers already have talked a bit about geofencing, but what we are actually planning to do within the next 12 months with the assistance of TfL is bring in geofencing for our whole area, so for the square mile, which is this zone coloured grey on this map. And we want it to do two things, because we've already got we've got an advisory speed limit of 15 miles an hour, which we've had in during COVID. We want to make that a formal regulation of 15 miles an hour. And I think it will be the first in the country if we actually manage to deliver that. But in the meantime, we plan to have a voluntary system. The buses will, TfL's buses will buy into that and have their buses tied into the speed limiting. We will try and negotiate with the taxi drivers for their vehicles to come into it. And we already know through some of our partnership working that some commercial companies, delivery companies, will be keen to do the same, and because it's good PR for them, as well as giving us the benefits that we want. And a lot of them already have kind of good driver behaviour programs. So, and I think as with that kind of ISA control, we know that we then get management of, if we get a certain percentage of vehicles running on those lower speeds, we then actually effectively control everything on the street, because there's no room to overtake. We don't have that kind of pressure. And similarly with the zero emission capable vehicles, we are working on bringing that in as a voluntary position, partly because legislation at the moment doesn't permit us to enforce through geofencing. So we wouldn't be able to be issuing fines even if we have the permits in place, even if we have the regulations in place for zero emission. I don't think we can enforce through geofencing, but we still think it's a valuable staged introduction, that we get that operating, we get as many people, again, buses, taxis, and those commercial vehicles that want to sign up to it. And we start to be able to measure how much difference it makes, and deliver against our objectives. So, and then once we potentially go a bit further on geofencing, we may be able to do controls based on the street hierarchy that we've drawn up. The green and orange streets on here are the ones that will be the primary movers of vehicles, traffic coming in and moving around the city. And then we get down to our local access streets, which we only want vehicles accessing specific properties off there. That will take quite a lot more sophistication to introduce, but it's definitely in our horizon. So anyway, thank you. That is a summary of what I need to say today, and hopefully we'll have some questions when we've all finished. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Samantha. And London is one of the cities that started off doing a kind of banning system, and that actually maybe spatial interventions are quite good with the point closures that Samantha was talking about. There is a couple of questions for Samantha, but we will ask Samantha to ask them on the chat because we are running out of time, and we would love to hear from Stephen in Helmond. So with no further hesitation, we will go over to Helmond.
Yes, thank you, Lucy. Hello, everybody. I want to tell you about the Intelligent Speed Assistance that we use in the ReVeAL project in the city of Helmond. First of all, I want to introduce you to Vitron. My name is Steve and I work for Vitron as a project manager for ISA. We are based in the Netherlands in the city of Deventer, and we also have an office in Helmond. And in that office, we also participate together with Helmond in the ReVeAL project. And we also have some offices in Germany. Vitron can best be described as an in-car service provider. So we deliver services for the driver to make driving more efficient, safer, and more comfortable for the driver. Our focus is on the aftermarket, so we develop systems for aftermarket vehicles, and we try to update the outdated vehicles in the fleet, the total vehicle fleet we have. Well, those last, we are active in many countries, but I don't pay too much attention to that. So I want to go to the ISA system we use in this project. As I said, it is an aftermarket system which we developed for the best possible user experience. So this system limits you to the maximum speed that's on the road. But we don't want to make it too hard, so it's really it limits you on the pedal, but it doesn't brake. It's really comfortable, and that was our main goal. The information in the system is sourced by the smart camera. So it's the picture you see on the top right. This smart camera scans road signs and gives it to the ISA system, and the ISA system will limit the vehicle to the maximum speed. Besides the smart camera, we also use a digital map to validate if the speed that we see on the road is correct. I have a small movie about the HMI that you see in the car. At this point, we turn to the right and we see a 70 sign. The camera will see the sign and communicate with the digital map if the sign is valid or not. And when it's valid, then it limits the vehicle to 70. So when we pass the sign, the throttle is getting back, and you drive slower and slower until you hit the 70. So this is the system we also use in the Helmond test. We have two variants on this system. So the data from the digital map and the camera is always there, but the way we interact with the driver is different. Our first variant of the system is overrulable with the pedal. So you are limited, but only if you push the pedal, the accelerator pedal fully at 100%, you will be limited, unlimited again. So you can overrule the system for a short while. And the second variant of the system is not overrule. You cannot overrule it with the pedal, but you can only overrule it with a red button. So it's an emergency button to kill off the system for a second or in an emergency situation. We do get the data from the overruling system. So in our back office, we see that the system is overruled on a specific GPS location. And when it happens a lot of times from the same location, we can check what's happening there to see if we need to improve something, or if there is a sign misplaced or something wrong in the digital map. But there are just two ways to overrule, and these are the ways that we offer. So this is basically the ISA technique that we can offer as Speedtron. And in the Helmond case, we did research in a specific area. For that, there is also a geofencing module available. So we can, for example, near a school zone, put a geofence that between school hours the speed is 15 instead of 30, and in the evening hours it's faster. And we also, in the Helmond case, passed a school zone in our test. The goal of this test was to find out what the impact is on a zone when ISA is implemented. So we tried to get more and more vehicles in the zone with ISA and to see the difference with the situation where there's no ISA cars in the zone. To do that, we first had a week of testing, of measuring in the zone without any ISA vehicles, and after that, we put more vehicles in every day. We used different vehicles, so we had the Ford vehicles in there, which has an ISA system on board standard, and we had the Speedtron vehicles in there, which has an aftermarket system. And for us, it was also a goal to see the difference between those two systems and to see how the users react on those systems. To measure the speeds, we had different radars on the route. So on the right, you see a picture of the placement of the radars. We had 6 radars, and those radars are measuring every vehicle in the zone passing to indicate what the speeds are of those vehicles. The participants were driving 10 of our cars, and were driving around circles in the zone to check what the influence is when more vehicles have ISA on board. So these are the 3 different routes. There was a short route, a medium route, and a large route. And then I want to go to the results. I have a lot of tables and graphs in here. I just want to show some of them. And we have a big report on all the results available in the YouTube project. This one is about the speed distribution, and I picked radar 2 and radar 4 for this as an example. The blue column is the situation in the first week where there were no ISA vehicles involved. And the orange one is when there are ISA vehicles involved, and we see a shift in that. So radar 2 is a radar where the speed is limited to 50 kilometers an hour, and we see that in the first week there were cars in the 50 till 60 categories more than the second week. So we see a shift of cars moving back to the maximum speed. And the same was the case at radar 4. So that was one of the things that we saw in the data. This is a table about average speed. Well, I just don't go through all the numbers, but I say to you that we saw a drop in average speed at the most busiest points. So radar 2 is a very busy point, and we see that the average speed is really dropping over there. At less busy points, we saw less impact on the average speed, but we saw on other factors. This is an image of the percentage of vehicles exceeding the speed limit. So on the left, you see week 1. For example, radar 2 shows that 48 of the cars is overspeeding in week 1. So that's a lot. And in week 2, we see a drop. And again, that's on the most busy routes, we had the most impact. And in the other radars, you see less impact. But there were also other reasons for that. For example, we found out that radar 3 was near a speed bump, and we saw that our impact of ISA is lower over there. Then I have a table to compare the percentage of vehicles exceeding the speed limit in another way. So in this way, you can see really that we are shifting and seeing more green in the second week than in the first week. On also the very high categories, so that's over 54 kilometers an hour in the 50 kilometer zone and over 34 kilometers an hour in the 30 zone. Those are really dropping. So that was pretty positive for the average speed. So I just have limited time, so there's a lot to tell you about this data, but just picked out some points that are very interesting from the results. At least, oh, sorry, I drop back again. The most important thing is that we dropped a lot in peak speed. So in the first week, we had also cars driving over 90 kilometers an hour. In the second week, while we were driving the ISA vehicles, there was nothing, no cars in that region. So that was one of the most important conclusions of this test. And that's what I wanted to tell you. Besides, one thing is that the UVARs can have a contribution to ISA as well. In this case, in Helmond, we tested it for a week in a specific zone and saw already an impact. But when UVARs come in and, for example, you get a license to enter a specific zone, but you can only enter with an ISA vehicle, that can really have an impact, for example, in city centers. So that can really speed up the process of ISA. So that was in a nutshell what I wanted to tell you about the ISA system of Feedtron and the test we did in Helmond. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you very much, Stephen. And we managed to finish at least the presentations just on 5 o'clock. The presentations will be available on the website in the next week. We hope you've enjoyed the webinar. I've put the links. The questions we have answered in the text. We hope you've got them. I can't see them, but apparently it should have gone out to all attendees. They will also be on the website. Please do look at the guidance documents. They provide more details to the compliance of what Daniel was saying. We hope you liked this webinar and hope you will join us into the rest of the series on the other aspects.